Now lately I have been thinking a lot more about woodworking, and that brings us to the subject of the basement wood shop. So I thought you might be interested in taking a little look around the basement wood shop and then maybe follow that up with a discussion on my approach or philosophy to woodworking and why I think that's about to change. Don't worry, this is still primarily a blacksmithing channel. I just thought you might be interested in some of the other things that I'm up to that are still craft and tool related, like working on the cabin up the hill or doing projects here in the wood shop. Now, the last few years, my woodworking has been primarily geared more towards hand tool use. So the heart of the shop is this great big workbench. This is kind of a Roubaud-inspired workbench, and it's made out of Douglas fir timbers that are 5 inches thick, 24 inches wide. There's 4 timbers plus a couple of white oak strips on the side just to reinforce it, make it a little bit wider. And we're right at 10 feet long on this. It's a massive workbench. Like so many things I do, it's probably a little bit of overkill. Takes up more space than it needs to, but boy is it useful. And not just for woodworking. I do all sorts of things on this. Other than woodworking, I do some leather work on this. If we've got to sort products or stage things that are being shipped, this is a great place for it. Really a nice thing to have. I got another old bench back here. Maybe we'll talk specifically about the benches sometime and talk about them in more detail and how they're built. But this bench gets used more for staging tools and other things that I'm working with, so I don't pile them up on this bench quite so bad. It still tends to attract things like any flat surface will. But it really is nice having both benches. This takes up a huge part of the shop, and that is a downside of having nice benches like this, is it does limit space for other tools. Now behind the bench I've got some wall cabinets. This is an old antique cabinet, and it has just sandpaper in it. It was some sort of an office cabinet, had paperwork forms, something like that in it. And those are great places just for storing sheets of sandpaper. There's some other places that store rolls of Scotch-Brite. Really a very handy thing down here. This is probably the finest woodworking project that I've done in the last few years. And it is a wall tool cabinet or tool till, saw till, plane till. It has all of my most used bench planes in it. And of course, all of my saws are in here. This is still kind of unfinished. I want to put some drawers in these spaces, and I want to put doors on it that will hold a lot of things, like maybe the winding sticks would stand up in the door so they're not just laying in here. So it's not exactly finished, but it's functional, and for a long time, these things really didn't have a good place to live. The other little cabinet over here is just a piece of junk that I think was being thrown out of a firehouse that is being remodeled, but it looked like it might be handy. And I keep some non-hand tools in here. This is where my routers, router bits, things like that live, just because I wasn't willing to give up all the power tools when I started working more with hand tools. Right now, I'm glad I made that decision. Now, underneath the cabinets, I've got a couple of traditional joiner's style tool chests. These are both antiques. Neither one is in the best condition in the world, but they do still hold things and store stuff. This one holds mostly things that would probably be considered green woodworking tools. It has spoon carving knives, spoke shaves, draw knives, things like that in there. Even some unfinished spoons I need to finish carving. And it's just kind of a catch-all for a few other things. This other one used to hold most of my planes and things like that. But since I got the till done, now they're up there, they're easier to get to. I thought this was a great idea, have everything in one place, have a cover on it, keep the dust off the tools. But it really made it hard to get to the tools, and I like the wall cabinet way better. Then I have a shaving horse just kind of crammed in here. I have to drag it out a little bit if I really want to use it. This is great for doing work with a draw knife or a spoke shave. Really kind of a green woodworking tool for the most part, although I use it for doing axe handles, adze handles, things like that. I would like to have this in a place where it's easier to use and a little bit more accessible, and someplace where I don't trip over when I'm walking through this little alleyway over here. Behind there's a rack with various axes and adzes and things like that on there. just because I'm not sure where to put them. I suppose they probably ought to go in one of these other tool chests. This rack is not as well organized as I thought it would be when I built it. Now this corner over here is one of the things that really needs to change. This is a Festool table for a Festool track saw. It kind of takes the place of a table saw and a compound miter saw a little bit. It doesn't really do everything. This is way better for sheet goods, and I can take the track saw and some longer tracks that I have elsewhere, take them out in the driveway, set stuff on sawhorses, and if I've got 4x8 sheets of plywood, it's way easier to break it down there than it would be to drag it down here, even if I did have a table saw. The rest of this corner is a disaster. This is just a place where stuff gets piled, it's not organized. I don't hardly ever use any of the things that are stored in the overhead cabinets or this little bench. So right now my priority down here is to clean up this corner. And I'm hoping all the green woodworking stuff, the shaving horse, the chopping block, the froze, and maybe the tool chest with all of the green wood tools can fit in this corner and be a usable little workstation down here in this shop. Don't know how that's going to work. This little workbench is in terrible shape, but it's got some Beulah history, and I think I'm going to try and get it fixed back up, make something nice out of it. And there's a place in the little hand tool blacksmith shop that this will be a perfect fit if I can get it fixed up. So that's my current plan, is to put it up there. And we'll follow along with that project as I get to it. Then of course this is the door where I came in, so the stairs are up there, the rest of the house. Lumber storage. This rack isn't bad, it's on wheels. I can pull it out to get to the back side. It tends to get disorganized because there's a lot on there. But this pile of stuff is just boxes full of usable handle material for axe handles, adze handles, knife handles, chisels, gouges, all the kind of tools that I'd like to make in the blacksmith shop. I've collected way more wood for handles than I'll probably ever make tools. But that's all this, and it's not very well organized. It's just kind of a heap. So I'm thinking I need to make a secondary cabinet that either attaches to this or is freestanding but also on wheels. So I have a place to store all this, and I get to it without having to move everything off the top to get to the stuff on the bottom. That brings us over to my lathe. This is an old Rockwell Delta lathe that was in a high school wood shop. When they took this out and put it up for sale, I was afraid they were actually closing down the wood shop and weren't going to have shop classes anymore. But luckily, they were just upgrading. This thing's kind of old and worn out, not as true as I would like it to be. So they got a much better lathe out of the deal, but I got a cool piece of history. This was a shop somewhere in Wyoming. I can't remember the name of the town, saw it on Craigslist. Drove up there, it was an overnight trip, loaded up, another overnight trip back, but it was a nice trip. And I got a fairly decent lathe. You'll notice it has dust collection hooked up to it. That's really only good when I'm sanding. It doesn't take the big chips, but if you're sanding something in the lathe, it does pick up most of the sanding dust. And the dust collector is one that we put in when we built the house. I envisioned this as being a much more power tool intensive workshop at that time. And it's a good Oneida dust collector, centrifugal dust collector. Really works well, but it's right now only hooked up to the lathe and to the little bandsaw. This is a Jet 14-inch bandsaw. It's adequate for a lot of what I want to do, but it's not real precise. It won't resaw wide boards, and it doesn't really cut as straight as I would like it to. Fiddle with the guides a lot, and it makes it a little bit better, but it doesn't always hold. Although I did recently change it out to a set of ball bearing guides. Heck, those guides are probably worth about as much as the bandsaw is. But that made it better. It's still not really the bandsaw I would like, and I think I'm going to look at upgrading this. Oh, by the way, the dust collector is actually in the other room that isn't really wood shop. There's a little closet off of that. That's where the dust collector lives, so it doesn't take up space in here. That was a really smart decision on our part. Here I have a little wood stove that's for heat down here. Don't really use it very often, but on the coldest winter days, it can be awfully nice to have that little bit of an extra heat source. Material storage for projects I keep thinking I'm going to get around to. Remember the little plane and sawtill? The wood for that lived over here probably for about 4 years before I finally got that built. The wood for the doors is still over here. Some of this is for door and window trim and the face frame for the kitchen cabinets that I still need to get around to, which is one of the things that I really need to get busy on down here in this wood shop. Now my little office is through there, someplace where I can track lots of sawdust in, so it gets fairly filthy. Even with a dust collector, it's not perfectly clean down here. This is just a sharpening station. Mostly it holds this slow speed grinder that I use for sharpening the wood turning tools. I end up taking the stones for sharpening chisels and planes, things like that, to the workbench when I'm working on those things. So I don't do a lot of sharpening here, but it's an option, and there's a granite surface plate that I can work on if I need to really true something up and make it flat. Next to that, I have a cabinet with some drills and drill related stuff, as well as my drill press. This is a drill press I got at the equivalent to Harbor Freight. I think it was called Tool King, and that's what we had in our area at the time when I bought it. I've had this drill press for over 30 years, and it's still functional. Even though I'm a little bit hard on cheap tools and Harbor Freight tools sometimes, this has held up just fine, and I really don't regret owning the bargain drill press. Most of the basement is below grade level, but the lot slopes a little bit, so I was able to have a couple of windows on this end. They don't let in a lot of light, but it's still nice to have a real window. Sometimes you can look outside and see a turkey standing out there or something. Anyways, over here are my clamps. I have quite a selection of clamps. They're all kind of staggered in rows on here, and maybe that's something we'll take a closer look at how I built the clamp racks in another video. But while they are organized, they aren't always the easiest thing to get to, because the ones on the bottom row have the ones from the top two rows overlapping them. So you got to kind of fish through here. Try not to knock anything on the floor while you're reaching for the clamp you want. It's still way better than having them in a pile somewhere, and I don't have the wall space to have one row of clamps. So this is a good workaround, even if it is a little bit crowded. Now, as I've said, this has been primarily a hand tool shop, even though my initial intent down here was to have all the convenient machinery that most people have: table saw, bandsaw, joiner, hopefully a planer. And at one point I had some of that stuff. I mean, I still have the bandsaw, and I have the lathe, I have some routers, but I parted with my table saw about the time I made this bench, because there just didn't seem to be quite enough room for it in here. And I realized that if I was using a table saw, I wasn't going to force myself to learn to use hand tools as much. And that has been a fun learning experience, to kind of force myself to use hand saws, hand planes, chisels, things like that, for tasks that I might normally use with a table saw or a router table, or planing things with a thickness planer, joiner. All of those tools kind of keep me from doing that kind of stuff to some extent. And while I'm a lot more comfortable with the hand tools than I was when I started doing that, I unfortunately kind of miss some of the bigger tools, because there are a lot of things that I think I would do that I don't do because I just don't have the time to do it all with hand tools. There's a lot of stuff in this house that have not been finished. Things like the kitchen cabinets upstairs don't have face frames, cabinet doors, drawers. All of that stuff hasn't been done because it takes a lot longer to do it with hand tools and get everything done right than it would with machine tools. Having a table saw that makes nice clean rips and a joiner that leaves perfect square edges so that you can do all the joinery with hand tools if you want to would really make my life easier. And I think this shop is going to drift back the other direction. And hopefully that means that I can start getting more of these things done a little bit more efficiently. And some of the things I think, well, I could do that in 15 minutes or a half an hour if I just did it real quick on the table saw, might start getting done, because a lot of those little projects never get done with hand tools, even though they really wouldn't be that hard. Maybe it's a little bit of a mental block, it's hard to say. But I know I don't do as many things down here as I would if I had some of those other tools available for when I needed them. I still want to use hand tools for as much as possible. I like that approach. I like that they're quiet and that you can take the tool to the work. It's a little bit more relaxing. And frankly, I really like the hand tools. I love buying and collecting hand tools. And if you buy them and collect them, it's kind of nice to use them every now and then. And one of the bigger projects that I want to work on is a loom for Janet. All the looms she has, she's bought, other people have made them, and they're good looms, but there are little features that she would like to have, things she would like to try. That means we kind of need to make the loom ourselves so that we can do it exactly the way she sees it in her head. And the loom that we have in mind would have some large posts in the back that hold a lot of the mechanical stuff for the loom that makes it work. And that's something that's kind of hard to true up. If it's got a little twist in it, that's a lot of work to true up with hand planes. With a joiner, that's a piece of cake. It might take you 5 or 10 minutes to do it on a joiner. And with a surface planer, you can get it trued up on the other side. And I think that means we'll actually get it done. I've actually got parts for a loom down here started that I was doing with hand tools. That loom has been half built now for 3 or 4 years, and it's just not getting done because I've run into certain snags here and there that I know I can just work through with the power tools. So I think I'm going to make an investment in some power tools. I'm not exactly sure what yet, and it may take a year or 2 years to get all those tools into this shop. Or maybe if I do well at Handworks this year, I'll be able to afford to at least buy 1 or 2 of them. Is it hypocritical to be going to a hand tool woodworking show with the hope of selling enough product that I can actually buy machine tools instead of hand tools? Hopefully not. I think most of the people that go to a show like that have hybrid shops. They have machine tools and they have hand tools. Now, of course, there are some people that are hand tools only, and I really respect them and they do great work, but I'm not sure it's for me. Just like it's not really for me in the blacksmith shop. I wouldn't want to be without my power hammer, my belt grinder, the bandsaws up there. Those tools make me more efficient, and being more efficient makes it more enjoyable for me to spend time in the shop, and I think that will be true in this shop as well. And this also goes right along with my new philosophy here on Black Bear Forge, where I'm primarily a blacksmithing channel and most of the videos are still going to pertain to blacksmithing. I want to share other things with you, and I think setting up this shop, figuring out how to rearrange it, rebuilding that workbench, then working on the loom and the kitchen cabinets, all of that stuff, I think is going to be good video topics. And it may take a year, 2 years to get through all that stuff, but we will see that a little bit here and there. And we're going to just try and have a wider variety of videos here. I do hope all that makes sense. Now I have a question for the more serious woodworkers in the group. I was thinking about getting a benchtop joiner. It would fit under this bench, wouldn't take any floor space up, just pull it out, set it up here when I need to use it. It'd be really convenient, but reading forum groups and things like that online, I'm getting the impression that the limitations of a benchtop joiner would make me really unhappy with that decision. Running a 6 or 7 foot 4x4 post for a loom through a joiner that's only this long and not very heavy might just be a bad idea all the way around. So if you got an opinion about that, I would love to hear it down in the comments section, and I appreciate your input. In the meantime, I hope you have time in your day to get out to your shop, whether it's a blacksmith shop or a wood shop. Make something, but stay safe, wear your safety glasses. We'll see you for the next video.